Welcome to Eternal Darkness, where nightmares come to life. I'll be your host through these twisted tales tonight. Before we descend into the shadows, remember to like and subscribe to join our growing community of horror enthusiasts. Get comfortable, turn down the lights, and prepare yourself as we begin our journey into the unknown. I spent nearly 3 decades working for the National Park Service, moving through assignments in Colorado, Montana, and finally Louisiana. That final posting in 2019, at age 54, was supposed to be my wind-down assignment before retirement. I was named deputy director of a sprawling sector in one of Louisiana's most remote national parks. A place I won't name directly, though veteran Park Service employees could probably identify it from context. My sector encompassed roughly 40,000 acres of some of the most impenetrable wilderness in the American South. Mile after mile of dense hardwood forest, punctuated by occasional clearings where we maintained campgrounds and hiking trails. The terrain was unforgiving, thick understory that could swallow a person whole, cypress swamps that stretched beyond sight, and a network of waterways that seemed to shift and change with each heavy rain. The heat was oppressive, even in October when I first arrived. The humidity clung to everything like a wet blanket, making even simple tasks exhausting. But it was the silence that unnerved me most. In Colorado, you had wind through the pines, wildlife calls echoing off mountain faces. Here, the forest seemed to absorb sound, creating pockets of absolute quiet that felt unnatural. My predecessor, a grizzled man named Boudreau, who'd worked the area for 15 years, spent 2 weeks showing me the ropes before his retirement. He was a man of few words, but what he did say carried weight. On our final day together, as we stood at the edge of what locals called the deep country, a particularly dense section of forest that stretched for miles without a single trail, he turned to me with an expression I'll never forget. "You'll hear stories," he said, his weathered face serious in the dying light. "Some of them might seem like backwoods nonsense, but this land..." He paused, looking out into the darkening trees. "This land remembers things that happened long before any of us were born. You'd do well to listen to those stories, even if you don't believe them." I thought he was just being dramatic, the way old-timers sometimes get when they're passing on responsibilities. I wish I'd paid more attention to the fear in his eyes. The staff under my supervision was a mix of seasonal workers and lifers. Most were locals who'd grown up in the parishes surrounding the park. They knew the land in ways that no amount of training could teach. Which plants would cut you if you brushed against them, which waterways were safe to cross, where the ground looked solid but would swallow you up to your waist in mud. During my first month, I threw myself into learning every inch of my sector. I hiked the marked trails, memorized the campground layouts, and studied topographical maps until I could navigate by memory. But even after weeks of exploration, there were vast areas that remained mysteries. The deep country, in particular, seemed to resist mapping. Satellite imagery showed an unbroken canopy of green, but ground-level exploration revealed a maze of game trails, fallen trees, and water features that didn't appear on any official documentation. It was during these early reconnaissance missions that I first heard whispers about places in the forest that the staff avoided. They never called them dangerous outright, but there were certain areas where conversations would grow quiet, where even the most experienced rangers would find reasons to turn back early. The stories began filtering in during my second month, usually during the quiet evening hours when the day staff had gone home and the skeleton night crew was settling in. The park maintained a small ranger station at the edge of my sector, a modest building that served as headquarters for our operations. On particularly slow nights, when the weather kept campers away, the conversation would inevitably drift toward the peculiarities of our corner of Louisiana. Jerome Thibodeau, one of my senior rangers and a third-generation local, was the first to mention what he called the old troubles. Jerome was in his early 40s, a solid man with calloused hands and the kind of practical knowledge that comes from living on the same land your whole life. He wasn't given to flights of fancy, which made his stories all the more unsettling. My granddaddy used to work these woods when they were still privately owned, Jerome told me one evening as rain drummed against the station windows. Back in the 70s, before the federal government bought up all this land, he was part of a logging crew that would come in during the winter months when the ground was harder and they could get equipment back into the deep areas. Jerome leaned back in his chair, his coffee growing cold as he spoke. Granddaddy said there were places where the trees would grow different, twisted up, like they were in pain. The other loggers, they had names for those spots, called them sick ground. They'd mark them on their maps and work around them, even if it meant leaving good timber standing. I pressed for details, my curiosity overriding my skepticism. Sick how? Disease? Soil contamination? That's what Granddaddy thought at first. But the state agricultural people came out to test the soil in some of those areas back in the early 80s. Found nothing wrong with it. Rich, fertile ground, perfect for growing. But nothing would grow right there. Even today, if you know what to look for, you can spot those places. The trees are stunted, the undergrowth is sparse, and the animals won't go near them. Other staff members had their own stories. Maria Santos, a young biologist working on a temporary research assignment, mentioned finding animal remains in configurations that didn't make sense. Bone circles, she called them, describing deer skeletons arranged in perfect rings in small clearings deep in the forest. The bones were always clean, stripped of flesh but showing no signs of predation or scavenging. It's probably some kind of cultural practice, she admitted. Maybe hunters or locals who use those areas for ceremonies. But I've lived in Louisiana my whole life, and I've never seen anything like it. The arrangements are too precise, too deliberate, and they're always in the same areas where Jerome's grandfather marked those twisted trees. The most disturbing story came from Dwayne Boudreau, the nephew of my predecessor. Dwayne had been working the park for only 2 years, but he'd grown up hunting and fishing these woods with his uncle. He was barely 25, with the kind of enthusiasm that experience hadn't yet tempered, but even he spoke in hushed tones about certain areas of the forest. There's places where the sound don't carry right, he explained during a late-night conversation in December 2019. You can be talking to someone standing 10 feet away and they can't hear you, but you can hear things from miles off, clear as if they were right next to you. Voices mostly. Times crying. Uncle Boudreau taught me to stay away from those spots. When I asked what kind of voices, Dwayne's face went pale. Children mostly. Always children. But here's the thing. They're speaking French. Not the Cajun French you hear around here, but Old French. The kind they might have spoken 200 years ago. I only know because my grandmother spoke it, and she taught me some when I was little. These accounts accumulated over the winter months, creating a picture of a landscape marked by inexplicable phenomena. What struck me most was the consistency of the stories. Different people, from different backgrounds, all describing similar anomalies in overlapping geographical areas. As a man trained in scientific observation and logical analysis, I found myself caught between skepticism and growing unease. The breakthrough came in early 2020, when Jerome brought me a collection of old parish records he'd found in his family's papers. The documents dated back to the 1920s and 1930s, when the state of Louisiana was conducting land surveys in preparation for potential federal acquisition. The surveys included detailed notes about geographical anomalies and unsuitable terrain in areas that corresponded exactly to the locations my staff had been describing. The parish records Jerome shared with me painted a picture of systematic documentation stretching back nearly a century. Louisiana state surveyors in the 1920s had been meticulous in their work, creating detailed maps and reports as they evaluated privately held lands for potential federal acquisition. What I found in those yellowed documents was a pattern of notations that made my stomach turn. Survey team after survey team had marked the same areas as unsuitable for development or geologically unstable, despite soil samples that showed no obvious problems. More telling were the personal notes scribbled in margins, comments like, "Crew refuses to work this section," and "Recommend winter survey only," and, most disturbing, "Local guides will not enter after dark." But it was a single notation, buried in a 1931 survey report, that connected these modern observations to something much older. The surveyor, a man named Hébert Broussard, had written, "Local informants report this area was site of Thibodeau Plantation, destroyed circa 1847. Recommend historical research before final acquisition recommendations." That name, Thibodeau, sent me digging through the Parish Historical Society records. What I found there was a story that had been largely forgotten by official history, but lived on in the collective memory of local families. The Thibodeau plantation had been established in the 1790s by Émile Thibodeau, a French immigrant who'd been granted nearly 8,000 acres in recognition of services to the colonial government. The land grant encompassed what was now the heart of my sector, including those areas where modern park staff reported the strangest phenomena. Émile had built his fortune on sugarcane, using enslaved labor to clear the dense forest and establish vast fields. But according to the historical records, his relationship with the local Choctaw tribe had been contentious from the beginning. The tribe claimed that Émile's land grant included a sacred site, a natural spring they called Itahuma, which they believed was a gateway to the spirit world. The Choctaw had tried to negotiate with Émile, offering to trade other lands for the preservation of the spring site. But Émile had refused, viewing their spiritual beliefs as primitive superstition. He'd built his main house directly over the spring, incorporating it into an elaborate garden feature that became the centerpiece of his estate. What followed was a pattern of escalating tensions that played out over decades. The enslaved people working the plantation, many of whom came from African spiritual traditions that recognized the power of such places, began reporting supernatural occurrences around the spring. Children would disappear for hours or days, only to be found wandering the forest with no memory of where they'd been. Tools would be found arranged in strange patterns around the property. Livestock would refuse to drink from the spring water, even during drought conditions. Émile's response was to crack down harder on what he saw as superstitious behavior among his workers. He forbade gatherings, outlawed spiritual practices, and implemented harsh punishments for anyone caught near the spring after dark. But the phenomena only intensified. The historical records become fragmented after 1840, but what emerges is a picture of a plantation in decline. Crop yields dropped despite favorable weather. Workers began dying from diseases that physicians couldn't identify. Émile himself was said to have become increasingly paranoid and violent, convinced that his workers were practicing witchcraft against him. The end came in September 1847, according to a report filed with the parish sheriff by Celeste Thibodeau, Émile's 19-year-old daughter. She'd stumbled into a neighboring plantation just before dawn, covered in soot and blood, claiming that the enslaved people had risen up during the night and murdered her entire family. But when a militia company arrived at the Thibodeau plantation later that day, they found something that didn't match Celeste's account. The main house had been burned to the ground, but so had the slave quarters. The fields had been systematically destroyed, with crops uprooted and scattered. Most strange of all, someone had taken enormous effort to fill in the sacred spring, dumping tons of earth, stones, and debris into what had once been clear, flowing water. The bodies of Émile Thibodeau, his wife, and his 2 sons were never found. Neither were the bodies of the 93 enslaved people who had lived and worked on the plantation. The official report concluded that the enslaved population had killed the family, burned the buildings, and fled into the wilderness. But local observers noted that fleeing slaves would hardly have taken the time to destroy their own living quarters or to undertake the massive project of filling in the spring. Celeste's testimony was the only first-hand account of what had happened that night, but even that was problematic. She described being awakened by screaming and finding her family's bodies in their beds, throats cut. But when questioned more closely, she couldn't explain how she'd escaped when the rest of her family had been killed in their sleep. She couldn't explain why the slave quarters had been burned along with the main house, and she couldn't, or wouldn't, explain why she'd been found covered in ashes that forensic examination showed came from multiple fires. Within 6 months, Celeste had died under mysterious circumstances, reportedly found drowned in a shallow creek less than 2 miles from where she'd been living with relatives. The official cause of death was listed as accidental drowning, but witnesses reported that her body showed signs of violence inconsistent with a simple drowning. The more I researched the Thibodeau plantation tragedy, the more convinced I became that the official record had been deliberately sanitized. Too many details didn't add up. Too many witness accounts had been dismissed or ignored. And too many of the surviving documents showed signs of deliberate omission. Pages torn out, sections blacked out with ink, entire witness statements missing from files that should have contained them. I spent weeks combing through archives in 3 different parishes, piecing together fragments of the real story. What emerged was far more disturbing than a simple slave rebellion. The evidence pointed to something that had driven both the enslaved population and their enslavers to acts of desperate violence. A letter from Father Benedict Robichaud, the Catholic priest who had served the plantation community, surfaced in the archives of a diocese in New Orleans. Written just 2 weeks before the tragedy, it described conditions at the Thibodeau plantation that were, in his words, an affront to God and nature. Father Robichaud wrote, "I have visited this place 3 times in as many months, called to perform last rites for members of both the family and their workers. Each time I have found conditions that defy explanation. The master of the house speaks of voices calling to him from beneath the earth. The enslaved people cross themselves when they speak of the spring water, claiming it runs red at night. I have seen with my own eyes children who age years in the span of days, and others who seem to forget their own names." The priest's letter continued. "Yesterday, I was summoned to bless a newborn child, but when I arrived, the mother showed me an infant that appeared to be months old, with teeth already showing and eyes that tracked movement like those of an adult. When I questioned her, she insisted the child had been born only hours before. Master Thibodeau claims his workers are practicing dark magic, but I fear the evil in this place runs deeper than human sin." Even more disturbing was a diary entry I found in the personal papers of Dr. Alphonse Guidry, a physician who had been called to the plantation multiple times in the months leading up to the tragedy. His notes, written in a mixture of French and English, described medical conditions that seemed to progress in impossible ways. The Thibodeau boy, age 7, shows signs of premature aging that cannot be explained by any known disease. Guidry wrote in August 1847, "His hair has turned white, his skin is wrinkled like that of an elderly man, and he speaks of memories that predate his birth. His mother insists he was a normal child until he began playing near the spring. She begs me to help him, but I confess I have no treatment for such an affliction." Another entry, dated just days before the massacre, was even more alarming. "I have now treated 17 individuals from this plantation for conditions that have no name in medical science. Workers speak of time moving differently in certain areas of the property. They claim to have worked full days in the fields, only to return to quarters where their families insist they have been gone for weeks. Master Thibodeau himself appears to have aged a decade in the past month, though he cannot account for the time. These accounts painted a picture of a place where the normal rules of reality had begun to break down. But it was a single document, found in the personal effects of Celeste Thibodeau and donated to the Historical Society by a distant relative, that revealed what might have really happened on that September night in 1847. Celeste's diary, written in a mixture of French and English like many documents of the period, chronicled the final weeks of the plantation in devastating detail. Her entries described a household descending into madness, where family members would disappear for hours only to reappear with no memory of where they'd been. She wrote of workers who aged years overnight, of livestock that gave birth to stillborn animals with human-like features, and of a spring that seemed to whisper her name when she passed it after dark. The final entry, dated September 15, 1847, the day before the massacre, was barely legible, written in what appeared to be a shaking hand. The ground beneath the house moves at night. Papa says it is the foundation settling, but I know better. Something is trying to come up from below. The workers know it too. They have stopped trying to run away. They gather around the spring at night, chanting in languages I do not recognize. But I understand what they are doing. They are trying to send it back down. The entry continued. Mama has not spoken in 3 days. She sits by her window, staring at the spring, moving her lips like she is speaking to someone I cannot see. Jean-Baptiste found baby Claude floating face down in the kitchen wash basin this morning, but Claude was in his cradle, alive and breathing. We buried the floating baby behind the carriage house, but tonight I saw it crawling across the gallery, leaving wet handprints on the wooden floor. The final lines were the most chilling. I know what must be done. The Choctaw were right. Some places are not meant for the living. Tomorrow night, when the moon is dark, we will make our choice. Better to destroy everything than to let this evil spread beyond our borders. God forgive us for what we have awakened. God forgive us for what we must do to stop it. Reading those words in the quiet of my office, surrounded by modern maps and contemporary reports, I felt a terror that went beyond rational fear. This wasn't just an historical curiosity anymore. The places described in these old documents were places I walked every day. The spring that had driven the Thibodeau family to destruction was somewhere in the heart of my sector, buried under nearly 2 centuries of earth and debris, but perhaps not as dormant as everyone assumed. In March 2020, just as the COVID-19 pandemic was beginning to reshape every aspect of American life, I received a call that would change everything. The caller identified himself as Dr. Vincent Arsenault, a professor of Louisiana history at one of the state universities. He spoke with the measured cadence of an academic, but I could hear an underlying excitement in his voice that suggested this was more than routine scholarly inquiry. I've been researching the Thibodeau plantation for the better part of 3 years, Dr. Arsenault explained. I believe I've located the exact site of the original settlement, including the spring that figured so prominently in the historical accounts. I'd like permission to conduct a limited archaeological survey in your sector. Under normal circumstances, such requests required months of paperwork and bureaucratic review. But the pandemic had disrupted normal procedures, and frankly, I was intrigued by the possibility of finally locating a place that had become central to my understanding of the area's history. Dr. Arsenault seemed legitimate. He provided detailed references, university credentials, and a research proposal that demonstrated impressive knowledge of local history. What convinced me to fast-track his request was his methodology. Rather than relying on old maps or traditional archaeological techniques, Dr. Arsenault had been using satellite imagery analysis, combined with ground-penetrating radar surveys, to identify subsurface anomalies in the forest. He'd found what he believed was a spring-fed water source that had been artificially filled, surrounded by geometric patterns that suggested human habitation from the appropriate time period. The satellite data shows clear evidence of deliberate land modification, he explained during our phone conversation. There's a roughly circular area about 2 acres in diameter where the forest canopy is noticeably different. The trees are younger, suggesting the area was cleared and later reforested. But more importantly, there are linear features beneath the surface that appear to be foundation remains. Dr. Arsenault sent me his preliminary findings, and I had to admit they were compelling. The location he'd identified was deep in the forest, far from any marked trails, in an area that my staff had always described as somehow off, but never explored thoroughly. When I compared his coordinates to the spots where Jerome's grandfather had marked sick ground, and where modern staff reported strange phenomena, They aligned with disturbing precision. The professor arrived in early April 2020, accompanied by his wife, Dr. Simone Arsenault, who was an expert in soil chemistry and environmental analysis. They were both in their early 50s, soft-spoken academics who seemed utterly unprepared for the physical demands of deep forest exploration. But their enthusiasm was infectious, and their equipment was impressive. Ground-penetrating radar units, soil analysis kits, and photographic equipment that cost more than most people's cars. I spent 2 days with them, hiking into the target area and helping them establish a base camp. The location they'd identified was exactly where I'd expected it to be, based on my research into the historical documents. It was a small clearing, perhaps 50 yards across, where the trees grew in an almost perfect circle around a slightly raised mound of earth. What struck me immediately was the silence. In most areas of the forest, you could hear birds, insects, the rustle of small animals moving through the underbrush. But in this clearing, the quiet was absolute. Even our voices seemed muted, as if the air itself was absorbing sound. Dr. Arsenault was ecstatic. His ground-penetrating radar immediately identified the subsurface features he'd detected in his satellite analysis. Linear patterns that almost certainly represented building foundations, and a circular anomaly at the center of the clearing that he was convinced was the filled spring. "This is it," he told his wife as they set up their equipment. "This is definitely the site. Look at these readings. There's a void space about 12 feet down, probably a natural cave system that fed the spring. And these linear features match the description of the plantation house layout from the insurance records." I left them to their work, planning to return in 3 days to check on their progress. They had enough supplies for a week-long survey, satellite phones for emergency communication, and detailed maps showing the route back to the nearest park road. Dr. Arsenault assured me they'd conducted dozens of similar expeditions and were experienced wilderness researchers. That was the last time anyone saw them alive. When I returned to check on them 3 days later, I found their campsite exactly as they'd left it. Their tent was properly erected, their equipment was neatly organized, their food supplies were untouched. But there was no sign of the researchers themselves. Their ground-penetrating radar unit was still running, displaying subsurface readings that showed they'd been making significant progress in mapping the underground features. Most disturbing was what they'd already uncovered. Using hand tools and careful excavation techniques, they'd exposed what was clearly the foundation of a large building. The stonework was consistent with 19th century construction, and they'd found artifacts, pottery shards, metal implements, fragments of glass, that dated to the appropriate time period. But it was the condition of their excavation that made my hands shake as I examined their work. They'd been digging methodically, following archaeological protocols, creating careful grids and documenting everything they found. But their most recent work showed signs of frantic, almost desperate digging. Tools were scattered around the site, soil was piled in hasty mounds, and their neat excavation grids had been abandoned in favor of what looked like panicked tunneling. At the center of their dig site, they'd partially exposed what was unmistakably a stone-lined well or spring opening. The stonework was more elaborate than the foundation remains, carved with symbols that didn't look European. Someone, presumably the Arsenaults, had cleared debris from the opening, revealing dark water about 6 feet down. I called their names, hoping they'd simply wandered off to explore other parts of the site, but the forest remained silent. I checked their tent, finding their personal belongings undisturbed but discovering something that made my blood run cold. Dr. Simone Arsenault's field notebook was open on their camp table, her final entry barely legible. "Vincent has been talking to the water for 2 hours. He says it's speaking to him in French, telling him about the children who were thrown down here. I can't hear anything, but he's becoming agitated. The soil samples we took yesterday show impossible mineral concentrations, elements that shouldn't exist in this environment. Something is very wrong with this place. We should leave, but Vincent won't stop digging. He says we're close to finding them." The entry ended there, the pen trailing off the page as if she'd been interrupted mid-sentence. I immediately contacted park headquarters and local law enforcement, reporting the Arsenaults as missing persons. Within 6 hours, a search and rescue operation was underway, involving park rangers, parish sheriff's deputies, and volunteer search teams from neighboring communities. The coordination was impressive, with search dogs, helicopter support, and experienced trackers combing every inch of the forest surrounding the excavation site. For 5 days, teams searched in expanding circles from the abandoned campsite. They found no footprints leading away from the area, no signs of struggle, no indication that the couple had packed up their equipment or planned to leave. The search dogs, typically reliable in dense forest conditions, seemed confused and agitated near the excavation site, refusing to work in the immediate area and whimpering when handlers tried to force them closer to the exposed spring. The investigation revealed several disturbing details that didn't make it into the official reports. The Arsenaults' satellite phone showed no outgoing calls after their second day at the site, but the call log revealed something strange. Their phone had registered 17 incoming calls during their final night, all from the same number. When investigators tried to trace that number, they found it had been disconnected for over 30 years. It had belonged to a payphone at a gas station that had been demolished in 1989. More puzzling was the condition of their photographic equipment. Dr. Arsenault had been documenting their excavation with a high-end digital camera, taking hundreds of photos of their finds and the excavation process. But when investigators examined the camera's memory card, they found that all photos taken after the second day had been corrupted. The files were still there, showing correct dates and timestamps, but every image was either completely black or showed abstract patterns of light that resembled nothing in the natural world. The only functioning photograph from their final day was a single image that Dr. Simone Arsenault had taken with her phone, apparently just before making her final journal entry. The photo showed her husband standing at the edge of the exposed spring, leaning down as if listening intently to something. His expression was one of rapt attention, almost childlike wonder, but his eyes reflected an intensity that seemed barely human. What made the photo truly disturbing was what appeared in the background. The image showed the stone-lined spring opening, but the water level was much higher than I'd observed when I found the abandoned campsite. The water appeared to be moving, creating ripples and patterns that suggested something large was moving beneath the surface. Enhancement of the digital image revealed what looked like pale shapes floating just below the waterline. Shapes that were roughly human in size and configuration. The official search was called off after a week, when it became clear that the couple had simply vanished without leaving any trail that search teams could follow. The case was handed over to state police investigators, who spent another month interviewing university colleagues, examining financial records, and exploring the possibility that the Arsenaults had staged their own disappearance for unknown reasons. But I knew they hadn't walked away from that excavation site. Something had happened to them in that clearing, something connected to the spring they'd uncovered and the history they'd been so eager to unearth. The evidence was subtle but undeniable. The frantic digging, the corrupted photographs, the mysterious phone calls, and most of all, the complete absence of any trail leading away from the site. In the months that followed, I found myself returning to the excavation site repeatedly, drawn by a combination of professional responsibility and personal obsession. The area had been officially closed to the public, marked with warning signs about unstable ground conditions. But I had legitimate reasons to check on the site, to ensure that the exposed archaeological features weren't attracting unauthorized visitors or causing environmental damage. Each visit revealed new details that deepened my unease. The exposed spring, which had contained dark water when I first found the abandoned campsite, was now completely dry. The water level had dropped steadily over the weeks following the Arsenaults' disappearance, until only damp stones remained at the bottom of the 8-foot-deep opening. More disturbing was what the receding water had revealed. The bottom of the spring was littered with objects that had clearly been there for decades or centuries. I could see metal implements, pottery fragments, and what appeared to be personal items, combs, jewelry, children's toys. But I couldn't bring myself to climb down into the opening to examine them more closely. Something about the spring itself radiated a sense of wrongness that made my skin crawl. The surrounding forest was changing too. Trees near the excavation site began showing signs of disease or stress, yellowing leaves, dead branches, bark that peeled away to reveal pale, sickly wood underneath. Animals avoided the area entirely. Even insects seemed scarce, creating an unnatural silence that made every footstep sound unnaturally loud. Most unsettling were the changes in the excavated foundations. The arsenos had carefully exposed the stone foundation of what had clearly been a substantial building, probably the main house of the Thibodeau plantation. But over the months following their disappearance, the exposed stonework began to shift and settle, revealing details that hadn't been visible during their initial excavation. Carved into the foundation stones were symbols that didn't match any architectural tradition I recognized. They weren't decorative elements. They were deliberate markings, etched deep into the stone and filled with a dark substance that might have been tar or pitch. The symbols appeared to be some kind of writing, but not in any language I could identify. They had the angular, geometric quality of very old script, possibly predating European settlement of the area. By winter 2020, I had to face the fact that the Arsenault excavation site had become my obsession. I was visiting it weekly, sometimes more often, always finding new details that demanded explanation. I started bringing a camera, documenting the changes I observed, building a photographic record of what was happening to the site over time. It was during one of these winter visits that I made a discovery that would haunt me for months to come. On a cold February morning in 2021, I was hiking one of the established trails about 2 miles from the excavation site when I noticed something unusual hanging from a branch about 8 feet off the ground. At first glance, it appeared to be some kind of equipment that a hiker had accidentally left behind, but as I got closer, I realized it was a camera, an expensive-looking film camera suspended from the branch by its leather strap. The camera was positioned deliberately, not tangled in the branches as if it had been thrown or dropped. Someone had carefully placed it there, at a height that would require climbing to retrieve it, in a spot where it would be visible to anyone walking the trail but not easily accessible. The leather strap showed no signs of weathering, suggesting it hadn't been there long, but the camera itself was an older model, the kind that serious photographers still preferred for certain types of work. I left it there initially, assuming the owner would return for it. The trail where I found it was moderately popular, used by day hikers and nature photographers who appreciated the old-growth forest and occasional wildlife sightings. It wasn't unusual for visitors to cache equipment while exploring off-trail areas, planning to retrieve it on their way back to the parking area. But when I returned 3 days later, the camera was still hanging there, unchanged. Park policy required us to collect abandoned property after a reasonable waiting period, so I climbed up and retrieved it, planning to tag it for the lost and found at the ranger station. The camera was a professional-grade 35mm model, probably worth several $100s, with a partially exposed roll of film still inside. The camera body showed signs of recent use. The metal was clean, the lens was free of dust, and the film advance lever moved smoothly. Whoever owned it was clearly an experienced photographer who took good care of their equipment. I stored the camera in our lost and found cabinet, where it sat for nearly 8 months while we waited for someone to claim it. Park visitors occasionally asked about lost items, but no one ever inquired about the camera. By late 2021, it had become just another unclaimed item gathering dust on our shelves. It was Jerome who suggested we develop the film. During a slow December evening, as we were going through old lost and found items to make room for new arrivals, he picked up the camera and shook it gently. "Still got film in it," he observed. "Might be vacation pictures or something. Could help us figure out who it belongs to." The idea made sense. If the photographs showed identifiable people or locations, we might be able to track down the owner through social media or local photography groups. Jerome knew a guy in town who still developed film for the few photographers who preferred it to digital imaging, and the cost would be minimal. 2 weeks later, Jerome returned with a packet of developed photographs and a confused expression on his weathered face. "You need to see these," he said, spreading the photos across my desk. "I can't make sense of what they're showing." The first few photographs appeared normal enough. Shots of the forest taken from various angles, focusing on specific trees, clearings, and natural features. The photographer had clearly been documenting a particular area, moving systematically through the landscape and recording everything they observed. The technical quality was excellent, with good composition and proper exposure that indicated real skill with the camera. But as I examined the photos more carefully, I began to recognize the locations they depicted. These weren't random forest scenes. They were all taken in the area around the excavation site where the arsenautes had disappeared. The photographer had documented the same clearing, the same circle of unusually spaced trees, the same slightly raised mound where the couple had been digging. The middle section of photos showed the excavation in progress. I could see carefully dug trenches, exposed foundation stones, and excavation tools scattered around the site. But these weren't photos of the arsenault dig site as I remembered it. The excavation shown in the photos was more extensive, more sophisticated, with wooden scaffolding and equipment that the missing couple had never possessed. Most disturbing was the human figure visible in several of the photographs. A man in his 50s, wearing work clothes and a broad-brimmed hat, was shown pointing at various features of the excavation, examining artifacts, and posing next to exposed sections of the foundation. His face was clearly visible, and I recognized him immediately. It was Dr. Vincent Arsenault, the missing professor. But that was impossible. These photos had been taken with film, using a camera that I'd found hanging in a tree nearly a year after the Arsenault's disappearance. Film photography required time for development, and the photos showed Dr. Arsenault engaged in excavation work that was far more advanced than anything he'd accomplished during his brief time at the site. The final section of photographs was where things became truly inexplicable. The images showed Dr. Arsenault standing near what appeared to be a fully restored 19th century plantation house, complete with whitewashed walls, broad galleries, and elaborate gardens. He was pointing at architectural details, examining decorative elements, and posing in front of various sections of the building as if giving a guided tour. But there was no plantation house at the excavation site. There never had been. Not in my lifetime, or in the lifetime of anyone I'd spoken with. The Thibodeau mansion had been destroyed in 1847, burned to the ground and never rebuilt. The site contained nothing but forest and the foundation stones that the Arsenaults had partially exposed during their ill-fated excavation. As I continued examining the photos, they became increasingly overexposed, as if the camera had been malfunctioning, or the film had been damaged by light. The final images were almost completely white, showing only faint shadows and indistinct shapes that might have been buildings, people, or simply artifacts of the photographic process. Jerome stood quietly while I studied the photographs, his expression troubled. Finally, he broke the silence. "That's the missing professor, isn't it? The one who disappeared at the dig site?" I nodded, unable to trust my voice to remain steady. "So how did he take pictures with a camera we found a year later? And what's that building he's standing next to? There ain't no building like that anywhere in the park." Those were the questions that would haunt me through the winter of 2021 and into the following spring. I had physical evidence, photographs developed from film, showing a missing person engaged in activities that seemed to have taken place after his disappearance, in locations that didn't exist in any objective reality I could verify. The rational explanations were limited and unsatisfying. The photos could have been faked, but the film development process made sophisticated forgery extremely difficult. The camera could have belonged to someone else who happened to resemble Dr. Arsenault, but the facial features were unmistakably his. The building in the photos could have been located somewhere else entirely, but the background landscape matched the excavation site exactly. I was left with the inescapable conclusion that these photographs documented something that couldn't have happened, taken by someone who shouldn't have been able to take them, showing places and events that existed outside the normal flow of time and space. In the months following the discovery of those impossible photographs, I found myself drawn deeper into an investigation that was slowly destroying my rational worldview. I'd spent 3 decades as a park ranger, trained in scientific observation and logical analysis. But the evidence I was uncovering challenged everything I thought I understood about reality. I began visiting the excavation site almost daily, armed with surveying equipment, cameras, and soil analysis tools. My official reports described routine monitoring of an archaeological site, but my real purpose was to understand what had happened to the Arsenaults and why their disappearance had been documented in photographs that shouldn't exist. The changes at the site were accelerating. The exposed foundation stones had shifted dramatically over the winter, settling into configurations that revealed the complete outline of a large building. But more than that, new stonework was appearing, not being uncovered by erosion or natural processes, but literally materializing in the ground, as if the earth itself was reconstructing the original structure. By spring 2022, nearly 2 years after the Arsenaults' disappearance, the foundation had become a maze of interconnected chambers and passages that descended much deeper than any 19th century building should have required. Using a flashlight and rope, I explored the upper levels of what had become an underground complex, finding rooms that contained furniture, personal belongings, and artifacts that appeared to be from the 1840s, but showed no signs of age or decay. In what had clearly been a parlor or sitting room, I found a daguerreotype photograph in a silver frame, showing a family group posed in front of an elaborate mansion. The faces in the photograph were those of the Thibodeau family, based on descriptions I'd found in historical documents. But the mansion in the background was the same building that appeared in the impossible photographs of Dr. Arsenault. The dining room contained a table set for a formal meal, with china, crystal, and silver that looked as if it had been polished that morning. The food on the plates was fresh, still warm, as if the diners had just stepped away and would return momentarily. But dust covered everything equally, suggesting the room had been undisturbed for decades. Most disturbing was the children's nursery on the upper level of the foundation complex. The room contained toys, clothing, and furniture appropriate for several children of different ages. But the toys were arranged in patterns that seemed deliberately symbolic. Dolls positioned in circles, blocks stacked in precise geometric shapes, toy soldiers arranged in formations that created complex designs when viewed from above. On the nursery wall, someone had painted a mural depicting the forest surrounding the plantation. But the forest in the mural was alive in ways that the real forest never was. Trees had faces in their bark, animals watched from the shadows with human eyes, and children played games among the roots and branches. At the center of the mural was the spring, but instead of water, it contained what appeared to be stars, as if it were a window into infinite space. It was in this nursery that I found Dr. Simone Arsenault's field notebook, the same notebook I'd seen at their abandoned campsite nearly 2 years earlier. But now it contained dozens of additional pages, filled with handwriting that matched hers perfectly, but described experiences that couldn't have happened after her disappearance. The final entries were dated months after the couple had vanished. Day 127. Vincent has stopped aging. I watch him in the mirror each morning, and his reflection hasn't changed in weeks. My own reflection is becoming unreliable. Sometimes I appear as I am, sometimes as I was 20 years ago, sometimes as I will be when I'm old. Time moves differently here, flowing backward and forward like water finding its level. Day 143. The children visit us regularly now. They're the ones who were thrown into the spring during the massacre. But they don't seem to remember dying. They play in the gardens during the day and tell us stories about the plantation when it was alive. They speak French, but I understand them perfectly, even though I've never learned the language. Day 158. We tried to leave again today, but the forest has changed. The paths lead back to the house no matter which direction we walk. Vincent says we're not prisoners, we're residents. He's begun helping with the archaeological work, documenting the house and grounds for future researchers. He doesn't seem to remember that we came here from outside. Day 171. I understand now why the enslaved people filled in the spring. It's not evil exactly, but it's hungry. It feeds on time itself, on the moments between past and future. The plantation exists in all its moments simultaneously. The day it was built, the night it was destroyed, and every day in between. We experience them all, living every possibility that ever existed in this place. The final entry was the most chilling. Day 184. A new researcher will come soon. I've seen him in the spring water, a man with a camera who thinks he's documenting the past. But he's really documenting the future, his own future, the moment when he realizes he can never leave. I want to warn him, but the children say that would spoil the game. They've been playing this game for more than a century, and they're very good at it. As I read those words by flashlight in the underground nursery, surrounded by toys arranged in patterns that seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at them, I finally understood what had happened to the Arsenaults. They hadn't disappeared. They'd been absorbed into something that existed outside normal time, a place where past and present coexisted, and where the rules of reality were negotiable. The spring wasn't just a water source. It was a focal point for something much older and stranger, something that the Choctaw had recognized and respected, something that Emile Thibodeau had disturbed when he built his mansion over it, and something that had been temporarily contained when the enslaved people filled it with earth and debris in 1847. But the spring had never been truly sealed. It had been waiting, patient and hungry for someone to dig down to it again, to expose it to light and air and human curiosity. The Arsenaults had been exactly what it needed. Researchers driven by academic passion, willing to dig deeper and stay longer than casual explorers. Now it was waiting for the next curious visitor, someone who would see the photographs of Dr. Arsenault, read the historical accounts, and decide to investigate for themselves. Someone like me. As I climbed out of the foundation complex that evening, I realized I was already trapped. I'd been visiting the site for nearly 2 years, documenting changes, taking photographs, becoming increasingly obsessed with understanding what had happened there. The evidence was all around me. My own camera contained dozens of photos showing the site in various stages of reconstruction, images that documented a process that shouldn't be possible. I was becoming part of the story, another researcher drawn into the spring's patient web. Soon, someone else would find my camera hanging from a tree branch, would develop the film, and would see photographs of me standing next to a fully restored plantation house, pointing out architectural details of a building that existed only in the spaces between moments. The game continues, as it has for more than a century. The spring waits beneath its covering of earth and debris, hungry for time and memory and human curiosity. And somewhere in the restored rooms of a mansion that burned down in 1847, Dr. Vincent and Dr. Simone Arsenault continue their research, documenting a place that exists in all its moments simultaneously, waiting for the next scholar brave enough or foolish enough to dig down to the truth. I write this account as a warning, though I know it will read like the fantasy of an aging ranger with too much time on his hands. But the photographs exist, developed from real film. The excavation site can be found by anyone persistent enough to search for it, and the spring is still there, covered but not sealed, patient as only geological time can be patient. Some places are not meant for the living. Some stories are not meant to be uncovered. And some truths are too terrible to survive in the rational world we think we inhabit. But they survive nonetheless, waiting in the deep places, in the spaces between seconds, in the moments when reality grows thin and the impossible bleeds through. The spring remembers everything, and it's always hungry for more. My flashlight cut through the pine-dark silence, and I caught a glimpse of something that shouldn't have been out there at that hour. It wasn't just the smeared footprints near a half-chewed backpack that worried me. It was the deep, ragged marks on the trunk of a centuries-old Ponderosa, as though clawed by a twisted hand driven by a savage intent. I had been on countless night searches, but none had ever made me feel so certain that I was about to cross a boundary I couldn't uncross. This happened to me back in 2011 in the San Juan National Forest of Colorado. I was 28 then, a search and rescue officer who prided himself on level-headed decisions and a calm approach to emergencies. My colleagues respected my ability to maintain composure when others panicked. I had a reputation for finding lost hikers when others gave up hope. The day had begun normally enough. I woke at dawn in my small cabin near the ranger station, made coffee, and reviewed weather reports. Mid-September in the mountains meant unpredictable conditions. Warm days could suddenly give way to frigid nights with little warning. I checked my equipment, as I did every morning, ensuring my pack contained fresh batteries, first aid supplies, water purification tablets, and emergency rations. By noon, I was at the station completing paperwork from our previous rescue, a family of 4 who had ventured too far from a designated campsite. Nothing dramatic, just tourists who had underestimated the vastness of the wilderness. I remember thinking it would be a quiet day. At 3:47 p.m., the call came in. A man named Brandon Ellis and his hiking companion Vincent Morales had failed to return to their campsite the previous evening. Their friends had waited until morning before reporting them missing, hoping they'd simply decided to extend their hike. The sheriff's dispatcher sounded unusually tense, mentioning that another camper had reported strange noises from the direction the men had headed. "Define strange," I said into the receiver. They wouldn't elaborate, just said it wasn't wildlife. Made them pack up and leave before sunrise. I called in Ryan and Mark, 2 officers who had proven themselves reliable on difficult searches. Ryan was a former wilderness guide with an almost supernatural sense of direction. Mark, an ex-Army medic, could treat almost any injury with limited supplies. "What's your take?" Ryan asked as we loaded gear into our truck. "Another case of unprepared tourists?" "Maybe," I replied, checking our topographical maps. "But the sheriff called twice in 40 minutes. That's not typical." "Area has a history," Mark mentioned casually. "My grandmother used to tell stories about that section of forest, said the old tribes avoided it." I rolled my eyes. "Let's stick to facts. 2 men, last seen heading toward Piedra Ridge. Their vehicle is still at the trailhead. They had supplies for a day hike, not an overnight." We drove in relative silence, the radio occasionally crackling with updates from dispatch. The sky darkened prematurely as clouds gathered, promising rain by nightfall. I felt an unusual heaviness in my chest as we parked by the trailhead. The forest seemed quieter than normal. No birdsong, no rustling of small animals in the underbrush. Their red Jeep sat alone in the small gravel lot, covered in a thin film of dust. I ran my finger across the hood. Cold. They'd been gone at least a day. "Standard search pattern?" Mark asked, adjusting his pack. I nodded. "We'll follow the main trail to where it forks, then split up. Keep radio contact every 15 minutes. The forest enveloped us as we moved away from the trailhead. Pine trees stood like silent sentinels, their branches creating a dense canopy that filtered the waning daylight into ghostly patterns on the forest floor. The path was well marked initially, winding through stands of aspen whose leaves had just begun to turn golden. "Trail's clear," Ryan observed. "No signs of disturbance." I nodded, but something felt off. The forest was too still, as if holding its breath. Normally these woods would be alive with sound. Chickadees calling, squirrels chattering, the soft rustling of deer moving through undergrowth. Instead, a profound silence pressed against us. "Anyone else notice how quiet it is?" Mark whispered, voicing my thoughts. Ryan stopped, cocking his head. Yeah, not even wind in the branches. We continued, our boots crunching on the packed earth, the sound unnervingly loud in the hush. After about 2 miles, the trail forked. The left path descended toward the river, while the right climbed toward a ridge offering spectacular views of the valley. Which way do you think they went? Ryan asked. I studied the ground, searching for footprints or broken twigs. According to the report, they mentioned wanting to photograph the sunset from the ridge. Right path it is, Mark confirmed. As we began our ascent, the trail narrowed and grew steeper. Roots from ancient trees created natural steps in some places, while in others, erosion had left loose stones that shifted treacherously underfoot. The forest grew denser, the massive pine trunks standing closer together, branches intertwining to block what little remaining daylight filtered down. I checked my watch. 6:32 p.m. We had perhaps an hour of usable light left. We should consider setting up a base camp soon, I suggested. Continue the search at first light. Ryan turned to me, his expression perplexed. We've still got time. These guys could be injured, waiting for help. I hesitated, unable to articulate the growing sense of unease crawling up my spine. Something about this forest section felt wrong, like we were being observed. Fine. We push on for another 30 minutes, then reassess. The path grew increasingly difficult to follow, branching into smaller game trails that wound confusingly through the undergrowth. I kept my eyes trained on the ground, searching for any sign of human passage. Then Mark called out, "Guys, over here!" He stood by a massive fallen log that bridged a small ravine. Kneeling, he pointed to something partially hidden beneath it. My heart rate quickened as I approached. A torn piece of fabric, bright blue, caught on a splintered branch. I recognized it immediately as the type used in high-quality hiking jackets. "Recent?" Ryan asked. I nodded. "Very. No weather damage, colors still bright." I stood, scanning the surrounding area with renewed focus. They came this way. We crossed the ravine using the fallen log as a bridge. The forest grew even darker on the other side, the trees older and more massive, their branches creating a cathedral-like canopy above us. The ground became softer, damper, covered in a thick carpet of decomposing pine needles that muffled our footsteps. I felt a cold drop hit my cheek and looked up. Rain had begun to fall, light at first, but quickly intensifying. Within minutes, we were trudging through a steady downpour that reduced visibility and turned the trail into slick mud. "We should turn back," Mark suggested, raising his voice over the drumming of rain on leaves. "This is getting dangerous." I was about to agree when Ryan pointed ahead. "Light." I saw a light through the trees. We froze, straining to see through the curtain of rain. For a moment, nothing. Then, a brief flash, like a flashlight beam sweeping across the darkness. "Hello," I called out, my voice echoing strangely through the trees. "Search and rescue. Is anyone there?" No response came, but the light appeared again, more distant now, moving away from us. "They're moving," Ryan said, already pushing forward. "We need to catch up." "Wait," I said, grabbing his arm. "Something's not right. Why wouldn't they respond?" But Ryan had already pulled away, hurrying through the rain toward the retreating light. Mark and I exchanged concerned glances before following. The rain intensified, becoming a deluge that soaked through our waterproof gear. Thunder rumbled overhead, followed by lightning that illuminated the forest in stark, momentary brilliance. In those flashes, the trees looked twisted and wrong, their branches reaching like grasping hands. We lost sight of Ryan briefly, then heard his shout from ahead. When we caught up, he stood motionless, staring at something on the ground. A backpack lay in the mud, its contents scattered. A broken camera, food wrappers, a torn map, all strewn across the wet earth. But what caught my attention were the marks around it. Deep impressions in the soft ground, too large for a human, too oddly spaced for any animal I recognized. What made these? Mark whispered, crouching to examine them. I had no answer. The prints were roughly foot-shaped but elongated, with what appeared to be claw marks at the ends. They led away from the backpack, deeper into the forest. We need to radio this in, I decided, reaching for my device. Only static answered my call. The storm, or perhaps the dense forest itself, blocked transmission. As darkness fell completely, we reluctantly decided to make camp. None of us said it aloud, but we all felt it. We were being watched from the shadows beyond our flashlight beams. Something waited out there, beyond the boundary of light. I took first watch, sitting with my back against a massive tree trunk, flashlight in one hand, knife in the other. The rain eventually subsided, leaving behind a thick mist that wound between the trees like spectral fingers. In the absolute darkness, I heard it first. A soft, deliberate sound. Not the random noises of the forest at night, but something methodical. Something circling our camp. Dawn broke reluctantly through the mist-shrouded trees, revealing a forest transformed by rain. Droplets clung to every needle and leaf, catching the weak sunlight like thousands of watching eyes. I had managed perhaps an hour of fitful sleep during Mark's watch, my dreams filled with shadowy figures moving just beyond my vision. "Did you hear anything during your watch?" I asked Mark as we packed up our soggy equipment. He hesitated, eyes darting to Ryan before answering. "Just the usual forest sounds." Ryan tossed his pack over his shoulder. "We should keep moving. Those hikers have been out here for at least 2 nights now." I nodded, though my instincts screamed to turn back, to leave this section of forest behind. Professional obligation won out over personal fear. We had a job to do. Using the scattered contents of the backpack as our starting point, we attempted to follow the strange tracks we'd discovered the previous night. The rain had partially obscured them, but enough remained visible to establish a direction, deeper into the forest, away from established trails. "ID in the pack confirms it belonged to Brandon Ellis," Mark said, examining a soaked wallet. "No sign of Vincent's belongings." The forest grew thicker as we advanced, the massive pines standing shoulder to shoulder like ancient guardians. Their lower branches had died and fallen away over the decades, creating an eerie colonnade of bare trunks supporting a distant ceiling of green. The ground was soft and springy with centuries of accumulated needles, making tracking difficult. "Look at this," Ryan called, kneeling beside a massive trunk. I approached, and my breath caught. Deep gouges marred the bark, starting about 7 feet up and raking downward in parallel lines. The exposed wood beneath appeared fresh, the tree's sap still oozing from the wounds. "Bear?" Mark suggested, though his tone conveyed doubt. I shook my head slowly. "Bears leave broader marks, and they usually scratch horizontally." I reached up, measuring the starting point against my height. Whatever made these stands taller than any of us. "Mountain lion?" Ryan offered. "Maybe." But I didn't believe it. The spacing was wrong, the pattern unnatural. We continued our advance in silence, each lost in contemplation of what might have created those marks. The mist clung stubbornly to the forest floor, turning familiar shapes into looming specters that dissolved upon approach. Around mid-morning, we found the first truly disturbing evidence. A single hiking boot lay in a small clearing, its leather torn and shredded as if by tremendous force. Nearby, a sock still containing what appeared to be broken toes. Mark turned away, swallowing hard. Ryan's face drained of color. I knelt beside the grisly find, forcing myself to analyze it professionally. "Recent," I murmured. "No significant decomposition." "Are we looking at predator activity?" Ryan managed, his voice strained. I examined the boot more closely. The damage pattern was unlike anything I'd seen before. Not the crushing force of a bear's jaws or the slicing precision of feline teeth. This looked as if the boot had been gripped and physically torn apart by something with immense strength. We need to radio in again, I decided, pulling out my device. To my surprise, it connected this time, though the signal was weak and filled with static. I reported our position and findings, requesting additional search teams and possibly armed Forest Service personnel. Copy that, the dispatcher's voice crackled through. Be advised, weather system moving in. Expect heavy precipitation by late afternoon, additional teams approximately 3 hours out. The communication cut off abruptly, leaving us alone once more with our discovery. 3 hours, Mark repeated. Should we wait for backup? I considered our options. Standard protocol in a situation like this, evidence of potential violence or predator attack, would be to secure the area and wait for additional resources. But 2 men remained missing, possibly injured. Every hour decreased their chances of survival. We continue, I decided. But we stay together. No splitting up under any circumstances. We marked the location of our find with bright orange surveyor's tape and pressed onward. The forest seemed to close in around us, the spaces between trees narrowing, forcing us to wind through increasingly tight passages. The ground began to slope downward into a shallow ravine. The smell hit us first, a sickly sweet odor of decay mixed with something musky and animal. Ryan gagged, pulling his shirt over his nose. "What is that?" he choked out. We found the source moments later. A deer carcass lay in the center of the ravine, but not killed and partially consumed as one would expect from normal predator behavior. This animal had been arranged. Its limbs had been positioned unnaturally, splayed outward from its body. Parts of its hide had been systematically removed in long strips and hung from surrounding branches like grotesque decorations. "This isn't normal predator behavior," Mark whispered, his medical training apparently forgotten as he stared at the macabre display. "No," I agreed, fighting to keep my voice steady. "It's not." What disturbed me most wasn't the killing itself. Nature could be brutal. But the deliberate, almost ritualistic quality of the arrangement. This suggested intelligence, purpose, something beyond mere animal instinct. "We should leave," Ryan said suddenly. "Right now." For the first time in my career, I found myself seriously considering abandoning a search. Everything about this situation felt wrong. The unnatural silence of the forest, the strange tracks, the deliberate display before us. My training warred with primal instinct. Then we heard it. A faint call for help echoing through the trees. "Hello?" The voice was weak, distant. "Is someone there? Please. Help." Our eyes met, decision made in an instant. We scrambled up the ravine's far side, moving toward the voice. The terrain became increasingly difficult, with fallen trees and dense underbrush blocking our path. We called out repeatedly, receiving increasingly urgent responses. "I'm here. Oh God, please hurry." We finally broke through into a small clearing dominated by a massive boulder. Huddled against its base was a man, filthy, bloodied, his clothes torn to shreds. His eyes were wild with terror, darting constantly to the surrounding trees. "Vincent?" I approached slowly, hands raised to appear non-threatening. He nodded frantically, tears cutting tracks through the dirt on his face. "It took Brandon. It took him last night." I heard him screaming. Mark immediately went into medic mode, checking the man for injuries, while Ryan and I secured the perimeter of the clearing. Vincent had multiple lacerations across his arms and torso, as if he'd been clawed, but none appeared life-threatening. "Vincent, what happened?" I asked gently, crouching beside him. His eyes wouldn't focus, constantly shifting to the forest around us. We were setting up camp when we heard something moving around us. Brandon thought it was a bear, so we tried to make noise to scare it off. He swallowed hard. It laughed, like it found us amusing. A chill ran through me. What do you mean it laughed? Not like a person. More like it was imitating laughter it had heard. Then it started calling us, using our names. His voice broke. It knew our names. Mark shot me a concerned look over Vincent's head. Possible delirium from exposure or trauma. We ran, Vincent continued. Tried to get back to the trail, but it was too dark, and it seemed like the trees had moved. Nothing looked familiar. He gripped my arm suddenly, his fingers digging in with surprising strength. It hunted us, for hours, toying with us. Brandon tripped, and I just kept running. I heard him screaming for so long. I gently disengaged his grip. We're going to get you out of here, Vincent. Our colleagues are on their way. Can you walk? He nodded weakly, attempting to stand with Mark's assistance. As Ryan helped them, I moved to the edge of the clearing, scanning the surrounding forest. The mist had thickened again, swirling between trunks in hypnotic patterns. Something about the quality of light had changed. The day should have been brightening, but instead, a premature twilight seemed to be settling among the trees. We needed to move quickly. If Vincent's friend was still alive somewhere in these woods, our window for finding him was rapidly closing. If not, we needed to get Vincent and ourselves to safety before whatever had attacked them returned. Let's head back the way we came, I decided. Mark, can he make it? Mark nodded. He's dehydrated and exhausted, but his injuries are superficial. We can make it. We began our retreat, moving as quickly as Vincent's condition allowed. I took point, Ryan brought up the rear, and Mark supported Vincent between us. The forest seemed different somehow, the path we'd broken on our way, and less distinct than it should have been. Recognize any of this? Ryan asked after 30 minutes of silent trudging. I hesitated. We should have reached the ravine with the deer carcass by now, but there was no sign of it. The trees looked unfamiliar, older and more gnarled than those we'd passed earlier. Vincent noticed our confusion. It's happening again, he whispered. The forest. It changes. That's not possible, Mark said firmly. We're just turned around. The compass will get us back. I pulled out my compass and felt my stomach drop. The needle spun freely, unable to find north. I tapped it, shook it, but the result remained the same. Electronic interference, maybe? Ryan suggested, pulling out his own compass. Same result. Vincent laughed, a high-pitched sound verging on hysteria. It won't let you leave, not until it's ready. Get a grip, Mark snapped, then softened his tone. We'll find our way out, we always do. I checked my watch. 2:17 p.m. The additional search team should be entering the area soon. I tried the radio again, but received only static in response. As we debated our next move, a blood-curdling scream tore through the forest. Raw, agonized, human. It came from somewhere ahead of us, cutting off abruptly mid-crescendo. Vincent collapsed to his knees. Brandon, he whispered. Without discussion, we moved toward the sound, helping Vincent along as best we could. The forest grew darker with each step, the canopy thickening overhead, until only occasional shafts of light penetrated to the forest floor. The mist coalesced into writhing shapes that seemed almost purposeful in their movements. The smell hit us again, decay and musk, stronger this time. We crested a small rise and stopped abruptly. Below us lay a small hollow surrounded by massive ancient pines. Their trunks were marked with the same deep gouges we'd seen earlier, but far more numerous, as if the entire grove had been used as a scratching post by something immense. The ground was disturbed, showing signs of a violent struggle. Dark stains that could only be blood spattered the lower trunks and undergrowth. And in the center of it all, a man lay motionless. Even from a distance, I could tell it was too late for Brandon Ellis. His body was contorted unnaturally, limbs bent at impossible angles. Large portions of his clothing had been torn away, exposing skin marked with deep, parallel lacerations. Vincent made a sound somewhere between a sob and a scream. Mark held him back as Ryan and I cautiously approached the body. "My God," Ryan whispered as we drew closer. Brandon's face was frozen in an expression of absolute terror, eyes wide and staring at something only he had seen. The wounds covering his body showed no signs of feeding behavior. This wasn't a predator killing for food. This was something else entirely. I knelt beside the body, forcing my professional training to override my horror. "Recent," I murmured. "Within the last hour, I'd guess." "Look at the spacing of these wounds," Ryan said, pointing to a set of parallel gashes across the victim's chest. "Those aren't from any animal I recognize." I stood, scanning our surroundings with renewed vigilance. Whatever had done this could still be nearby. The hollow felt wrong. Too quiet. Too still. The mist seemed thicker here, curling around the ancient trunks like pale fingers. "We need to go," I said, keeping my voice low. "Right now." As if in response, a branch snapped somewhere in the forest behind us. We whirled toward the sound, flashlights cutting through the gloom despite the daylight hour. Nothing visible, just endless trees fading into misty darkness. Another snap, closer this time, followed by a soft rustling of underbrush. "Move," I ordered, abandoning protocol. We couldn't secure the body, couldn't properly document the scene. Survival took precedence. We retreated up the rise, half carrying Vincent between us. As we crested the top, I risked a glance back into the hollow. A figure stood beside Brandon's body, tall, impossibly thin, with limbs that seemed too long for its frame. It was partially obscured by mist, but I could make out a narrow head atop a long neck and arms that nearly reached the ground. It remained motionless, as if watching us, though I couldn't make out any features that might be a face. "Run," I whispered, then louder. "Run." We crashed through the underbrush, all pretense of careful navigation abandoned. Vincent found renewed strength in terror, keeping pace between Mark and Ryan. I brought up the rear, constantly looking back, expecting to see that elongated form pursuing us. The forest blurred around us, trees seeming to lean inward as we passed, branches reaching like grasping hands. The light grew dimmer with each passing minute, though my watch showed only mid-afternoon. After what felt like hours, but might have been only 20 minutes, we stumbled into a familiar setting. The ravine with the deer carcass. Relief flooded through me at this confirmation we were on the right track. "We're heading the right way," I gasped. "The trailhead should be about 2 miles from here." Vincent collapsed, shaking uncontrollably. "It's letting us think we're escaping," he muttered. "It's playing with us." Mark pulled him upright. "Stay with us, Vincent. We're getting out." As if contradicting his statement, the first heavy drops of rain began to fall. The storm predicted by the dispatcher had arrived, accompanied by distant thunder. Within minutes, we were trudging through another downpour, visibility reduced to mere feet. "Keep together," I shouted over the roar of rain. "Hold on to each other." We formed a human chain, Mark leading with Vincent behind him, followed by Ryan, with me bringing up the rear. The going was treacherous, the forest floor turning to slick mud beneath our boots. Twice Vincent nearly fell, saved only by Mark's firm grip. Lightning flashed overhead, momentarily turning the forest into a stark black and white photograph. In that instant, I saw it again. The elongated figure standing among the trees perhaps 50 yards behind us, perfectly still despite the raging storm. Then darkness returned, and when the next lightning flash came, the space was empty. "It's behind us!" I shouted, pushing the others forward with renewed urgency. We abandoned all caution, practically dragging Vincent as we splashed through deepening puddles and scrambled over fallen logs. The rain hammered down mercilessly, turning small depressions into miniature ponds and gentle slopes into treacherous slides. A tremendous crash sounded behind us, a falling tree or large branch. None of us looked back to confirm. Finally, blessedly, we spotted the orange surveyor's tape we'd left earlier marking the location of the shredded boot. We were on the right path, heading toward the trailhead. Hope surged through me, providing a second wind. The rain began to slacken, visibility improving incrementally. We maintained our pace, though my lungs burned and my legs trembled with exhaustion. Vincent had gone completely silent, moving mechanically, eyes vacant. "Almost there," Mark gasped encouragingly. "Just a little further." We broke through a stand of younger pines and found ourselves on the main trail, the wide, well-maintained path that would lead us back to civilization. In the distance, I could make out the flashing lights of vehicles at the trailhead. "They're here!" Ryan shouted. "The backup team's made it!" We staggered forward, waving our arms and shouting to attract attention. Flashlight beams cut through the gloom as Forest Service personnel moved toward us along the trail. As they reached us, Vincent collapsed entirely, unconscious from exhaustion and trauma. Mark immediately began briefing the medics who rushed to attend him. Ryan sank to his knees in the mud, relief evident in every line of his body. I remained standing, staring back into the forest we'd just escaped. Through the curtain of lessening rain, I thought I could make out a slender form watching from between distant trunks, motionless, patient, waiting. The subsequent hours passed in a blur of debriefings, medical examinations, and growing disbelief from the Forest Service officials who interviewed us. By nightfall, Vincent had been transported to the regional hospital, still drifting in and out of consciousness. Mark, Ryan, and I sat in the ranger station, nursing cups of bitter coffee as we repeatedly recounted our experience. "Let me get this straight," Ranger Supervisor Dawson said, rubbing his temples. "You're claiming some unidentified creature killed Brandon Ellis and terrorized his friend?" I chose my words carefully. "I'm saying we encountered something in that section of forest that I can't explain. The evidence at the scene showed signs of extraordinary violence not consistent with known predator behavior. Mountain lion attacks can be brutal," Dawson countered, "especially if the victim fought back." Ryan leaned forward. "This wasn't a mountain lion. The spacing of the wounds, the height of the marks on the trees, it doesn't match." Dawson sighed heavily. "I've got a dead hiker, a traumatized survivor, and 3 of my best search and rescue officers talking about some kind of forest monster. The county sheriff is breathing down my neck, and I've got reporters calling every 5 minutes. We can only report what we saw," Mark said quietly. "And what exactly did you see?" Dawson pressed. "Because so far all I'm hearing is about unusual tracks and claw marks. Did any of you actually see this thing clearly?" I hesitated, recalling the glimpses I'd caught through mist and rain, a tall, elongated figure with impossibly long limbs, but always at a distance, always partially obscured. Had I truly seen what I thought I had, or had fear and exhaustion played tricks on my perception? "We saw something," I admitted. "But no, not clearly enough to describe in detail." Dawson nodded as if that confirmed his suspicions. "Listen, I believe you encountered something out there. But the simplest explanation is usually the right one. We've had reports of a particularly large mountain lion in that area. Add in poor visibility, stress, and the suggestive power of finding a mutilated body. Well, the human mind fills in the blanks." I wanted to argue but found myself too exhausted to push back. Maybe he was right. Maybe we had encountered a mountain lion with unusual hunting patterns, and our minds had transformed it into something more sinister. "What about the recovery team?" Ryan asked. "Have they found Brandon's body yet?" A shadow crossed Dawson's face. "That's the other issue. The team reached the coordinates you provided, but there was no body." Silence fell over the room. "That's impossible," Mark said finally. "We marked the location clearly." "The team found your markers," Dawson confirmed. "They found blood evidence and signs of a struggle, but no body. They're still searching, but with night falling and another storm system moving in." I struggled to process this information. We had seen Brandon Ellis lying dead in that hollow, his body mutilated beyond any possibility of survival. How could it simply be gone? "The coordinates might have been off," Dawson suggested gently. "GPS isn't always reliable under heavy canopy." But I knew our location had been correct, which meant something or someone had moved Brandon's body after we fled. Dawson stood, stretching his back. "Get some rest, all of you. We'll resume the search at first light, weather permitting. I've got temporary accommodations set up for you in the auxiliary building." As he left, Ryan looked at me, his expression haunted. "You don't think it was a mountain lion any more than I do?" "No," I admitted. "But what's the alternative? That some unknown creature is stalking that section of forest? That it has intelligence enough to—" "What?" "Play with its victims? Remove evidence?" Mark shook his head slowly. "Whatever it was, we got lucky. Vincent got lucky. We need to focus on that." We eventually retreated to the cots that had been prepared for us, though I doubted any of us would find meaningful rest. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that elongated figure standing motionless among the trees, watching us flee. The forest itself seemed to have conspired against us, changing around us, leading us in circles until we stumbled upon Brandon's body. Had that been intentional? Had we been meant to find him? I must have dozed off eventually because I awoke with a start to find morning light filtering through the blinds. My watch showed 6:43 a.m. I had slept nearly 7 hours, though my body felt as if I hadn't rested at all. Ryan and Mark were already up, looking equally exhausted. We ate a quick breakfast in silence before rejoining Ranger Dawson in the main office. "Weather's cleared," he announced without preamble. "Recovery team is heading out in 30 minutes. I'd like you three to accompany them, help pinpoint the exact location." I felt a cold weight settle in my stomach at the thought of returning to that forest. Judging by their expressions, Mark and Ryan shared my reluctance. "Is that necessary?" Mark asked. We provided detailed coordinates. "Necessary?" "No." "Helpful?" "Absolutely." Dawson's tone left little room for argument. "Besides, I thought you'd want closure on this." He was right, of course. Professional pride, if nothing else, demanded that we see this through. We couldn't simply walk away from the most disturbing search operation of our careers. The recovery team consisted of 6 Forest Service personnel, all armed with rifles, a precaution against the mountain lion Dawson had decided was responsible. As we loaded into the vehicles, I noted the additional equipment they carried: body bags, evidence collection kits, cameras. The drive to the trailhead passed in tense silence. The forest looked different in the clear morning light. Less menacing, more mundane. Birds called from the canopy, and small animals scurried through the underbrush. Nothing suggested the horrors we had witnessed the previous day. "Hard to believe this is the same place," Ryan murmured as we began our hike along the main trail. I nodded. In daylight, without rain and mist obscuring our vision, the forest appeared as it should, a natural ecosystem, neither malevolent nor sentient. Had we truly experienced what I remembered, or had exhaustion and stress warped our perceptions? We We reached the fork in the trail and turned right, following the path toward the ridge. Everything matched my recollection perfectly. The root steps, the erosion patterns, the massive pines growing increasingly dense. We passed the fallen log where we'd found the first piece of torn fabric, now marked with additional surveyor's tape from the previous day's search. "So far, so normal," Mark commented, though his hand rested on his holstered sidearm. The Forest Service team moved with professional efficiency, maintaining proper spacing while keeping sight lines open. Their presence was reassuring, their rifles even more so. We reached the location where we'd found the shredded boot. It remained undisturbed from the previous day, sealed now in an evidence bag by one of the team members. From there, we continued to the ravine containing the deer carcass. Except it wasn't there. We stood at the edge of the ravine, staring down at empty space. No arranged deer remains, no strips of hide hanging from branches. Just ordinary forest floor, undisturbed except for our own footprints from the day before. "You're sure this is the right place?" one of the team members asked. "Positive," I replied, pointing to our clearly visible tracks in the still damp earth. "We came through here yesterday afternoon." The team leader, a stoic woman named Rivera, frowned. "Animals might have dragged the remains away, coyotes, scavengers." It was a reasonable explanation, but it didn't account for the complete absence of blood evidence or scattered bones. The display we had witnessed had been elaborate and extensive. There should have been some trace remaining. We pressed on toward the hollow where we had found Brandon's body. The forest remained eerily normal, birds singing, squirrels chattering, sunlight dappling the forest floor through gaps in the canopy. None of the oppressive silence or unnatural darkness we had experienced before. "This isn't right," Ryan whispered to me as we walked. "It's like it's hiding." I understood exactly what he meant. The forest felt like an elaborate set, a carefully constructed facade of normality concealing something much darker beneath. We reached the rise overlooking the hollow around midday. The Forest Service team spread out along the crest, scanning the area below with binoculars before proceeding. "Clear," Rivera announced after a thorough survey. "Let's move in. Maintain formation." We descended into the hollow, which looked nothing like I remembered. The massive ancient pines still surrounded it, but their trunks showed no signs of the deep gouges we had seen. The ground appeared undisturbed. No signs of struggle, no bloodstains, no body. "This can't be right," Mark insisted, turning in a slow circle. "The body was right here, right in the center." Rivera gestured to two of her team. "Full sweep, 5-meter grid pattern. Look for any evidence. Blood, tissue, personal effects." They began their methodical search while the rest of us stood in bewildered silence. I checked my GPS unit, confirming that we were indeed at the exact coordinates we had reported. "Could the rain have washed away the evidence?" one team member suggested. "Not all of it," I replied. "There was too much blood, too much disturbance, and it doesn't explain the absence of claw marks on the trees." Ryan had wandered to the edge of the hollow, examining one of the massive pines. "Look at this," he called. We gathered around him. The trunk appeared normal at first glance, but upon closer inspection, I could see faint vertical striations in the bark, as if the deep gouges we had witnessed had somehow healed or been covered over. "What would cause that?" Mark asked, running his fingers over the strange patterns. Rivera shook her head. "I've never seen anything like it." The search continued for another hour, yielding nothing. No blood evidence, no signs of violence, no trace of Brandon Ellis. It was as if the events we had witnessed had never occurred, or had been deliberately erased. "I don't understand," Ryan said as we regrouped. "We all saw it. Vincent saw it." "Speaking of Vincent," Mark interjected, "has anyone checked on his condition this morning?" Rivera nodded. He's stable but sedated. Doctors are concerned about his psychological state. He keeps insisting it won't let them find Brandon. A chill ran through me at those words. They echoed my own unspoken fear that whatever had killed Brandon had some purpose in mind, some reason for taking his body. We should head back, Rivera decided eventually. We'll report this as inconclusive. Maybe the sheriff's department can bring in cadaver dogs tomorrow. As we prepared to leave, I felt a sudden, overwhelming urge to share what I had truly seen. The elongated figure watching us from the trees, the way the forest had seemed to shift around us, Vincent's insistence that it was playing with us. But I remained silent. Without evidence, my account would sound like the ravings of a traumatized mind. We began our ascent out of the hollow. I lingered at the rear of the group, taking one last look at the scene of such horror that now appeared so ordinary. Movement caught my eye, subtle, almost imperceptible. A slight shifting of shadows between distant trunks, too deliberate to be wind or animal. I froze, staring at the spot. For a moment, nothing. Then, a figure stepped partially from behind a massive pine, tall and thin, limbs hanging unnaturally long at its sides. It made no attempt to hide, standing motionless, observing me from perhaps 100 yards away. "Hey!" I shouted, pointing. "Over there!" The entire team whirled, rifles raised. Rivera brought binoculars to her eyes, scanning the area I indicated. "I don't see anything," she said after a moment. I looked back. The figure was gone, the space between the trees empty once more. "It was there," I insisted, "just for a moment." Rivera lowered her binoculars, her expression a careful neutral. The mind plays tricks after trauma. Happens to the best of us. I wanted to argue but realized the futility. Without others witnessing what I had seen, my testimony alone wouldn't be enough to convince them. We resumed our trek back toward the trailhead, moving at a brisk pace despite the terrain. I continually glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see that elongated form following us through the trees. But the forest remained peaceful, showing no signs of the horror it had contained the previous day. As we approached the main trail, Ryan fell into step beside me. "You saw it again, didn't you?" he asked quietly. I nodded, relieved that someone believed me. "Just for a moment. Watching us?" "I've been seeing glimpses too," he admitted. "Quick movements at the edge of my vision, but every time I turn to look directly, there's nothing there." Rivera thinks we're suffering from some kind of stress reaction. Maybe we are. Ryan glanced into the dense forest to our right. Or maybe it's only letting us see it when it wants to be seen. The implications of that statement haunted me for the remainder of our journey. The idea that we were dealing with something intelligent enough to selectively reveal itself, to clean up evidence of its existence, to play elaborate psychological games with its victims. It defied everything I understood about the natural world. We reached the trailhead by mid-afternoon, the bright sunlight and open space providing a welcome respite from the claustrophobic forest. As the team loaded equipment into vehicles, Dawson approached us. "No sign of the body?" he asked, though he clearly knew the answer already. "Nothing," Rivera confirmed. "No blood evidence, no signs of struggle, just normal forest." Dawson sighed heavily. "I'll notify the sheriff. They'll want to bring in their own search teams, possibly with dogs." "They won't find anything," I said with quiet certainty. He gave me a long, evaluating look. "You really believe something supernatural happened out there, don't you?" I considered my response carefully. "I believe we encountered something that doesn't fit our understanding of local wildlife. Whether that makes it supernatural or just previously undocumented, I can't say." "Well, documented or not, I'm closing that section of forest to the public pending a full investigation." Dawson ran a hand through his thinning hair. You three are on administrative leave until further notice. Get some rest, see the department psychologist if needed. As we drove away from the trailhead, I looked back at the wall of pines marking the forest's edge. In the broad daylight, it appeared completely ordinary, just trees and underbrush, part of the natural world. But I knew better now. Something waited in those depths, something patient and intelligent. And as the forest receded in the distance, I couldn't shake the feeling that our encounter with it was far from over. 3 days passed. I spent them in my cabin, alternating between bouts of restless sleep and periods of intense hypervigilance. Every creaking floorboard, every rustling leaf outside my window sent my heart racing. I kept the lights on at night, a loaded shotgun propped beside my bed. On the 4th day, Ryan called. "They're saying Vincent disappeared from the hospital last night," he said without preamble. I sat upright, instantly alert. "What do you mean, disappeared?" "Walked out of his room around 3 a.m. Security cameras show him exiting the building, but there's no footage of where he went after that. His room was on the 2nd floor and he was still on IV antibiotics. Doctors say he shouldn't have been physically capable of leaving on his own." A chill spread through me. "He went back to the forest, didn't he?" Ryan's silence was answer enough. "Have they organized a search party?" I asked, already knowing what I had to do. "They're assembling one now. Dawson called to say we're still on administrative leave and explicitly instructed us not to participate." I began gathering equipment even as we spoke. Flashlight, compass, first aid kit, water, protein bars, knife. "When have you known me to follow instructions that might get someone killed?" Ryan's laugh held no humor. "I figured you'd say that. Mark and I are already gearing up. Meet at my place in 30? "I'll be there." I hung up and continued my preparations, moving with the methodical efficiency that had become second nature over years of search and rescue work. But this time was different. This time, I knew what waited in the forest, or at least I had glimpsed enough to understand how dangerous it truly was. I arrived at Ryan's small ranch house to find him and Mark already loading equipment into Ryan's Jeep. Both looked as exhausted as I felt, with dark circles under their eyes and a tense alertness to their movements. "You look terrible," Mark greeted me. "Speak for yourself," I replied, tossing my pack into the vehicle. "Have you even slept since we got back?" "Tried. Didn't work out." He gestured to the shotgun secured to my pack. "I see we had the same idea." Ryan and Mark had both brought firearms as well, Ryan a hunting rifle, Mark a revolver he normally kept locked in his gun safe. "Are we really doing this?" Ryan asked as we climbed into the Jeep. "Going against direct orders, potentially endangering ourselves to look for a man who might have walked into the forest specifically to die." I met his eyes in the rearview mirror. "You're here, aren't you?" He nodded grimly and started the engine. We drove in silence, each lost in our own thoughts. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the road, the light fading earlier than it should have as clouds gathered on the horizon. Another storm approaching, just what we needed. "How are we playing this?" Mark asked eventually. "Official search party will be at the main trailhead. We can't just walk in beside them." "There's a fire road about 2 miles south," I suggested. "Less used, but it'll get us close enough. We can cut through to where we found Vincent originally." Ryan nodded. "I know the one. Might be muddy after all the rain, but the Jeep can handle it." We diverted onto the smaller access road, which quickly deteriorated from gravel to rutted dirt. The Jeep bounced and slid, but Ryan navigated the challenging terrain with practiced skill. After about 20 minutes, we reached a small clearing that served as an unofficial parking area for local hunters. No other vehicles were present. The official search would be concentrated miles away at the main trailhead. We were on our own. "Full gear," I instructed as we exited the vehicle. "Radios on channel 3. Official search will be using 1 and 2. Test your flashlights now and keep weapons accessible but safe. We performed equipment checks with practiced efficiency, then gathered for a final strategy session. Most likely scenario, I began. Vincent returned to where we found Brandon's body. That hollow is our primary target. We move together. No splitting up under any circumstances. If anyone sees or hears anything unusual, we stop immediately and evaluate. Questions? Yeah, Mark said, checking his revolver one last time. What if we find what took Brandon? What's the plan then? I had no good answer. We were search and rescue, not hunters or soldiers. Our training prepared us to find lost hikers, not to confront unknown predators of potentially supernatural origin. We prioritize finding Vincent and getting out, I decided. We don't engage unless absolutely necessary to protect ourselves or him. Ryan and Mark nodded, though I could see the same doubt in their eyes that I felt myself. We were venturing into danger with no real plan beyond hope and desperation. We entered the forest as the day began its transition to evening, the canopy above immediately reducing the available light. The trees seemed to close in around us, branches reaching overhead to block out the sky. Despite the different entry point, I recognized the sensation immediately. That feeling of crossing a boundary into somewhere other. The forest grew quieter with each step we took, the normal sounds of wildlife fading until only our footfalls and breathing remained. The air felt heavier, thicker, as if we were walking through invisible cobwebs that clung to our skin. Anyone else notice the birds stopped singing? Mark whispered after we'd been walking for perhaps 20 minutes. Ryan nodded, eyes constantly scanning the surrounding trees. Just like before. We continued in silence, navigating by compass and GPS toward the coordinates of the hollow where we had found Brandon's body. The going was slow, the terrain unfamiliar from this approach. Twice we had to detour around dense thickets that seemed impenetrable. Does it seem like we're being herded? Ryan asked after the second detour. I had been thinking the same thing. The forest didn't appear to be changing around us as Vincent had described, but the path of least resistance consistently led us in a particular direction, not directly toward our target coordinates, but slightly east. Let's try to push straight through, I decided, pointing at a stand of younger pines that, while dense, should have been passable. We attempted to force our way through, but the branches seemed to interlock more tightly the harder we pushed, thorny undergrowth tearing at our clothing and skin. After struggling for several minutes and gaining only a few feet, we admitted defeat. This is impossible, Mark panted, extracting a thorn from his forearm. It's like the forest itself is against us. So we follow the path it's giving us, I said, making a quick decision. But we stay alert. This could be leading us into a trap. We resumed our journey along the more accessible route, constantly checking our GPS to ensure we weren't being led too far astray. The light continued to fade more rapidly than it should have, forcing us to activate our flashlights despite it being only late afternoon, according to my watch. The first raindrops hit about an hour into our trek, fat, cold drops that quickly intensified into a steady downpour. We donned rain gear, but the forest floor soon turned to mud, making each step treacherous. Just like last time, Ryan observed grimly. Storm comes right when we're deepest in. Thunder rumbled overhead, followed seconds later by lightning that briefly illuminated the forest in stark relief. In that momentary flash, I caught sight of something that made my blood run cold. A tall, thin figure standing among distant trees, watching our progress. "Did you see that?" I hissed, pointing. Mark and Ryan both nodded, faces taut with fear and determination. "It's tracking us," Mark whispered. "Has been since we entered." "Keep moving," I decided. "We find Vincent and get out. That's all that matters now." We pressed on through the worsening storm, the path growing increasingly difficult to navigate. Mud sucked at our boots, hidden roots threatened to trip us, and low branches whipped our faces as we pushed through. Despite these obstacles, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being allowed to proceed, that our journey was being observed with almost scientific curiosity. After another hour of grueling progress, we emerged into a small clearing that stopped us in our tracks. In the center stood a crude structure assembled from broken branches and what appeared to be strips of cloth, some kind of primitive shelter or monument. It rose perhaps 7 feet tall, vaguely conical in shape, with objects hanging from its frame that swayed in the wind. "What the hell is that?" Ryan breathed, raising his rifle slightly. I approached cautiously, flashlight beam revealing disturbing details. The strips of cloth were torn clothing. I recognized fragments of hiking gear, including what might have been pieces of Brandon's jacket. Other items hung among them: a broken watch, a shredded boot similar to the one we'd found days earlier, a crushed pair of eyeglasses. "Trophies," Mark suggested, his voice tight, like a hunter's display. But what truly chilled me were the marks carved into each branch of the structure. Not random scratches, but deliberate patterns that repeated. Not letters or numbers I recognized, but too regular to be meaningless. "It's communicating," I realized aloud. "Or trying to." Ryan snorted nervously. "What's it saying? Dinner is served?" A branch snapped loudly in the forest behind us. We whirled, weapons raised, flashlights cutting through the rain-soaked darkness. Nothing visible, just endless trees and mist. "We need to keep moving," I insisted, turning away from the disturbing structure. "Vincent is still out here somewhere." We continued our journey, now moving directly toward the coordinates of the hollow according to GPS. The forest seemed to be allowing our approach now, the undergrowth thinning, the path straightening. It was almost as if, having shown us its message, it was now inviting us to our destination. The rain slackened to a gentle patter, then stopped altogether, though mist continued to swirl among the trees. Our flashlight beams created eerie halos in the moisture-laden air, visibility limited to perhaps 20 feet in any direction. After another half hour of tense hiking, we began to recognize landmarks. The distinctive rock formation to our left had been visible from the rise overlooking the hollow. We were close. "Weapons ready," I murmured, checking that my shotgun was easily accessible. "But don't fire unless absolutely necessary. Sound carries in this forest." We crept forward, moving as quietly as our sodden gear allowed. As we approached the rise, I motioned for Ryan and Mark to drop to a crouch. We crawled the final few yards, positioning ourselves at the edge to survey the hollow below. What we saw defied comprehension. The hollow was transformed. The ancient pines surrounding it now bore the deep gouges we had witnessed days earlier, but far more numerous, covering the trunks from ground level to beyond the reach of our flashlights. The forest floor had been cleared of underbrush in a perfect circle, the exposed earth disturbed as if by tremendous activity. In the center stood Vincent. He was alive, standing upright, though his posture was unnatural, arms hanging limp at his sides, head tilted slightly back, staring upward into the canopy. He made no movement, showed no awareness of the rain that had soaked his hospital gown or the mud coating his bare feet. And behind him, partially concealed by mist and shadow, stood the entity. It was tall, at least 8 feet, perhaps more, with a body so thin it appeared almost two-dimensional when viewed from certain angles. Its limbs were disproportionately long, the arms hanging nearly to the ground, ending in elongated fingers tipped with what looked like dense, dark claws. Its head sat atop a neck too long and flexible to be human, cocked at an angle that suggested curiosity or assessment. I couldn't make out facial features through the mist and darkness, but I sensed it was watching us, knew we were there despite our attempts at stealth. My God. Mark whispered, his voice barely audible. As if in response to his voice, the entity's head turned slightly, orienting in our direction. Vincent remained motionless, seemingly unaware of either our presence or the creature standing mere feet behind him. "What's the play?" Ryan asked, rifle trained on the figure but finger carefully outside the trigger guard. I assessed our options. None of them good. We were witnessing something unprecedented, direct contact between a human and whatever this entity was. Vincent showed no signs of distress or fear. Was he in some kind of trance? Under control? Or had he come here willingly, seeking this encounter? We wait, I decided. See what happens. If Vincent is in immediate danger, we intervene. Otherwise, we observe. Minutes passed in tense silence. Rain dripped from the canopy above, creating a gentle percussion that only heightened the surreal quality of the scene. Vincent continued his unnatural stillness, while the entity maintained its position behind him. Then, without warning, Vincent spoke. His voice carried clearly through the night air, though he didn't appear to be addressing us. "They're here to watch," he said, his tone flat, emotionless, as you knew they would be. The entity made no sound in response, but Vincent continued as if hearing replies. "Yes, they're afraid, but curious, like you were, when you first found us." I exchanged alarmed glances with Ryan and Mark. Was Vincent communicating with the entity? Acting as some kind of translator? "It wants to know why we came back," Vincent said, still staring upward. "I told it you came for me. But that's not the whole truth, is it?" A chill ran through me as I realized Vincent was now addressing us directly. "You came because you need to understand," he continued. "Because what you saw doesn't fit your version of reality. Because it haunts you, knowing something exists beyond your comprehension." I stood slowly, revealing my position. If Vincent knew we were here, concealment served no purpose. "Vincent," I called, keeping my voice steady. "Are you okay? Are you hurt?" Vincent's head lowered gradually until he was looking directly at me. His eyes reflected our flashlight beams strangely, like those of an animal caught in headlights. "I'm more than okay," he replied, a faint smile touching his lips. "I'm transcending, becoming something new. It's showing me things, teacher to student." The entity behind him shifted slightly, its impossible limbs moving with fluid grace despite their awkward proportions. It made no aggressive move, simply observing our interaction. "What happened to Brandon?" I asked, taking a cautious step down the slope toward the hollow. Vincent's smile faltered. "Brandon couldn't hear it properly. His mind rejected what it was trying to share. His body failed under the strain of new knowledge. It killed him," Ryan stated flatly, still crouched with his rifle at the ready. "No more than a surgeon kills when a patient rejects a transplant," Vincent countered. "It tried to connect. Brandon fought. The connection broke him." I took another step forward. "Vincent, you need medical attention. You're not thinking clearly. Let us take you back." Vincent laughed, a sound so unexpected and incongruous it froze me in place. "Back to what? Artificial lights and processed food? Meaningless jobs and relationships? I've seen beyond that now. It's shown me the truth about our place in the world." The entity moved then, taking a single gliding step closer to Vincent. Its head lowered, bringing it nearer to Vincent's height, though still towering above him. The movement should have been threatening, yet somehow conveyed an almost protective quality. "What is it?" Mark asked, his voice filled with equal parts fear and wonder. Vincent cocked his head, as if listening to something we couldn't hear. After a moment, he spoke again. "It has lived in these woods for longer than you could comprehend. It watched the first humans enter this forest. It watched others come and go. It observed, learned, evolved. Is it alien? Ryan ventured. Vincent shook his head. Not in the way you mean. Not from another planet. It's from here. Always been here. Just adjacent to our reality. Watching through a membrane between worlds that grows thinner in certain places. Like here. As if to emphasize his words, the mist around the entity swirled more vigorously, momentarily revealing more of its form. Its skin, if that was the right word, appeared neither fully solid nor liquid, shifting with subtle patterns that hurt my eyes to focus on. It's reaching out, Vincent continued. Trying to communicate, to teach, to share knowledge beyond what humans have discovered alone. By killing people? I challenged. It doesn't understand our fragility, Vincent replied. It's learning, adjusting. Brandon was a miscalculation. It didn't mean to break him. I took another step forward, now at the edge of the hollow proper. The entity's attention seemed to fix on me, though I still couldn't make out anything I would call eyes or a face in its elongated head. And what about you, Vincent? I asked softly. Are you a better calculation? His smile returned, wider now. I'm suitable, compatible. My mind stretches instead of breaking. It's shown me things no human has ever seen. Knowledge no university could teach. What kind of knowledge? I pressed, taking another careful step. Vincent's expression grew distant, almost rapturous. The true nature of reality. The layers beyond what we perceive. The connections between all living things. The memories stored in the very rocks and soil beneath our feet. The entity shifted again, one impossibly long arm extending slightly toward Vincent. I tensed, ready to raise my shotgun, but the movement appeared gentle, almost tender. It wants to share with you too, Vincent said suddenly, his gaze intense. All of you. It senses your potential. Especially you, he added, looking directly at me. Me? I stopped my advance, a chill running through me despite the warmth of my rain gear. Vincent nodded. It's been watching you since you first entered its territory. It sees something in you, a capacity to understand, to adapt, to transcend. The offer hung in the air between us, tempting and terrifying in equal measure. What knowledge might such a being possess? What truths about existence might it reveal? For a moment, I felt a pull toward the center of the hollow, toward Vincent and the entity behind him. Then Mark's voice cut through my thoughts, sharp and alarmed. Josh, look at his eyes! I focused more carefully on Vincent's face. In the beam of my flashlight, I could now see that his eyes had changed. The pupils had expanded until almost no iris remained, and within those black pools, something moved. Patterns similar to those I had glimpsed on the entity's skin, swirling and shifting in hypnotic complexity. It's already inside him, Ryan whispered. The realization broke whatever momentary spell had been cast over me. Vincent was not communicating with the entity. He was being controlled by it, used as a mouthpiece, a lure to draw us in. Vincent, I said firmly, taking a deliberate step backward. We're leaving now. You need to come with us. His expression hardened. You still don't understand. I'm not a prisoner. I'm a student, an apprentice, the first of many, once others learn what it can teach. Others? Mark asked. Vincent's gaze shifted to him. Why do you think it arranged for Brandon's body to be found? Why it allowed you to escape and tell your story? It's recruiting, calling those whose minds might be compatible. A terrible understanding dawned on me. The missing body, the cleared evidence, our inexplicable ability to find our way out when the forest had seemed determined to confuse us. It had all been deliberate. We hadn't escaped. We had been released to spread the word, to pique curiosity, to draw others back. We need to go, I said to Ryan and Mark, backing further up the slope. Now." Vincent's face contorted with sudden anger. "You would reject such a gift? The opportunity to evolve beyond human limitations." The entity behind him straightened to its full height, its form seeming to expand as the mist swirled more violently around it. The gouges on the surrounding trees began to seep a dark, viscous substance that caught the light of our flashlights in oily rainbows. "Last chance, Vincent," I called. "Come with us now, or we're leaving without you." For a brief moment, something like doubt flickered across Vincent's face. A momentary return of his true self, perhaps fighting against whatever influence controlled him. His mouth opened as if to speak, but no words emerged. Then his expression smoothed once more into that unnatural smile. "Go then. Tell others what you've seen. Some will fear, but some will come seeking. The curious, the dissatisfied. Those who sense there must be more to existence than what they've been taught." The entity moved with sudden, startling speed, its elongated limbs carrying it from behind Vincent to the edge of the hollow in a single flowing motion. It stopped perhaps 30 feet from us, its head tilted in that same curious angle. Ryan raised his rifle instinctively, and Mark's revolver came up as well. "Don't," I warned them. "Just back away slowly. It's not stopping us from leaving." We retreated step by careful step, weapons ready but not aiming directly at the entity. It made no move to pursue, simply watching our withdrawal with what felt like analytical interest. Vincent remained in the center of the hollow, still smiling his unsettling smile. "We'll meet again," he called as we reached the top of the rise. "When you're ready to learn." We backed away until trees obscured our view of the hollow, then turned and moved more quickly through the forest. None of us spoke, focusing entirely on putting distance between ourselves and what we had witnessed. To my surprise, our return journey proved remarkably straightforward. The forest that had seemed so maze-like on our entry now offered clear paths back toward the fire road. No obstacles blocked our way, no dense undergrowth forced detours. Even the rain had stopped, the clouds parting to reveal a night sky brilliant with stars. It was letting us go, just as Vincent had said, releasing us to tell our story, to spread word of its existence. We reached Ryan's Jeep without incident and piled in, soaked and exhausted. Ryan started the engine but made no move to drive, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. "What the hell do we do now?" he asked finally, his voice barely audible over the idling engine. I had no answer. We had failed to rescue Vincent, if rescue was even the right concept for what had happened to him. We had confirmed the existence of something beyond rational explanation, something intelligent and potentially dangerous. But what could we possibly do with that knowledge? "We tell the truth," I decided finally. "As much of it as we can without sounding completely insane. We warn people to stay out of that section of forest." "And if they don't listen?" Mark asked from the back seat. "If Vincent was right, and some people will be drawn to it specifically because of the danger?" I had no answer for that. The entity had recognized something in humanity, curiosity perhaps, or the eternal search for meaning beyond the mundane. It had found a way to call to that aspect of our nature, to use it as a lure. "We drive," I said eventually. "We get out of here, get some rest, and figure out the rest tomorrow." Ryan nodded, putting the Jeep in gear. As we pulled away from the parking area, I looked back at the wall of trees marking the forest's edge. For just a moment, I thought I saw a tall, thin figure standing at the tree line, one impossibly long arm raised as if in farewell. Then it was gone, and there was only darkness beyond the reach of our headlights. 1 month has passed since our failed attempt to rescue Vincent. The official search for him continues sporadically, though most have given up hope of finding him alive. The prevailing theory is that he wandered into the forest in a state of delirium and succumbed to exposure or wild animal attack. Brandon Ellis's body was never recovered, despite multiple extensive searches. I've been placed on extended administrative leave pending psychological evaluation. Ryan and Mark fare no better. Ryan has requested a transfer to another district, while Mark has submitted his resignation entirely, citing personal reasons. We've spoken little about what we witnessed in that hollow. The official report we filed mentioned finding Vincent in an altered mental state, communicating with an unidentified presence in the forest. Deliberately vague, carefully worded to avoid outright lies while obscuring the full bizarre truth. Even so, we've become objects of sidelong glances and whispered conversations at the ranger station. The Forest Service has officially closed that section of the San Juan National Forest, citing environmental concerns and unstable ground conditions. Warning signs have been posted at all access points, though I doubt they'll deter everyone. Some people are drawn to forbidden places precisely because they are forbidden. I've moved out of my cabin near the ranger station, unable to sleep with the forest so close. My new apartment in town offers some psychological distance, though my dreams remain haunted by elongated limbs and swirling patterns that hurt to look upon. Today I received a letter. No return address. The handwriting unfamiliar yet somehow recognizable. Inside, a single sheet of paper contained just a few lines. The hollow waits. Knowledge expands. Others have come. Others have stayed. The membrane thins. When you're ready to learn, it will welcome you back. Below these cryptic sentences, a crude drawing, the same repeating patterns we saw carved into the branches of that strange structure in the forest. And beneath that, a signature. Vincent. I should report this. Turn the letter over to the authorities as potential evidence in a missing person case. Instead, I find myself staring at those patterns, trying to decipher meaning from their alien geometry. Sometimes, when my focus blurs just right, I almost think I can see something moving within them. Something pulling at me from behind a thin membrane of reality. 3 hikers have gone missing in the San Juan National Forest in the past month, despite the closure. All experienced outdoors people, all last seen heading toward the forbidden section. Search parties found no trace, though one reported hearing voices that didn't sound quite human, echoing through the trees at dusk. I've started researching similar incidents in other forests around the world. The patterns are there if you know what to look for. Unexplained disappearances, witnesses reporting encounters with impossibly tall, thin entities, strange structures of branches and personal items found in remote clearings. Native legends from every continent speak of liminal spaces where the boundary between worlds grows thin, where entities from adjacent realities can reach through. What happened to us in that forest wasn't unique. It was just one manifestation of something that has been occurring throughout human history. Contact between our world and whatever exists alongside it, separated by a membrane that occasionally grows permeable. I dream of the hollow almost nightly now. In these dreams, Vincent stands at its center, surrounded by others, the missing hikers perhaps, and others I don't recognize. Behind them all looms the entity, its form more defined in my dreaming mind than it ever was in reality. They beckon to me, offering knowledge, transformation, transcendence. Some nights I almost go to them. Ryan called yesterday, his voice tight with controlled panic. I saw it in town, he said without preamble. Standing outside my apartment building, just watching my window. Nobody else seemed to notice it. Did it do anything? I asked, my mouth dry with sudden fear. No, just watched. Then it was gone between one blink and the next. He paused, breathing heavily. It's not confined to the forest, Josh. It can reach us anywhere. I've started seeing things too, tall, thin shapes at the periphery of my vision, gone when I turn to look directly. patterns in ordinary objects that momentarily shift into those same carved symbols from the hollow. Brief moments when the world seems to warp slightly, the membrane between realities stretching thin enough to glimpse what lies beyond. Mark hasn't answered his phone in 3 days. His neighbor reported seeing him walking toward the edge of town late Tuesday night, carrying nothing but wearing hiking boots, in the direction of the forest. I should be terrified. I should be running as far from Colorado as possible. Instead, I find myself drawn back toward that hollow, toward the entity that waits there, toward the knowledge Vincent described so rapturously. What truths might exist beyond the limited perception of human senses? What understanding might transcend our biological constraints? If the entity truly offers evolution rather than destruction, is that something to flee from or embrace? I find myself thinking of human history, how we've consistently feared the unknown, demonized the different, rejected new paradigms until forced to accept them. Could this be the next step in our development as a species? Contact with an intelligence so different from our own that it shatters our conceptual frameworks and rebuilds them into something greater? Or is that exactly what it wants me to think? A mimetic infection, a manipulative lure designed to draw prey willingly into its grasp? I don't know anymore. The boundary between reality and nightmare has grown as thin as the membrane Vincent described. Sometimes I wake unable to remember who or what I am, my identity dissolving into larger patterns of existence before resolving back into human form. I've written this account as a record, a warning, a confession. Perhaps someone will find it after I'm gone and understand what happened to us in those woods. Perhaps they'll recognize the signs in themselves if they ever encounter that hollow and what waits within it. Because I've made my decision. Tonight, I return to the forest. Not to rescue Vincent. I understand now that he doesn't need rescuing. Not to confront the entity. Confrontation implies opposition, and I no longer feel opposed to what it offers. I go to learn. To see what lies beyond the boundary I first glimpsed when my flashlight cut through the pine dark silence and I caught a glimpse of something that shouldn't have been out there at that hour. If you're reading this and feel drawn to follow, to seek out that hollow and what waits within it, ask yourself one question. Are you prepared to become something other than human? Because once that boundary is crossed, I suspect there is no crossing back. The hollow waits, knowledge expands, the membrane thins, and I am ready to learn.